Good afternoon. I'm Nick Raber with Ephesus News, UWP, home of one of the seven wonders of the world. Today we are at Shore Church and we are doing a Deep Thoughts with Nick and Carl segment. Over to you, Nick and Carl. Thanks for that introduction there, Nick. This is Deep Thoughts with Nick and Carl, and I'm Nick.
I'm Carl.
And today we are playing a little bit of a game. We're playing the Jesus game, where Jesus is blank and blank. Carl, explain this game for us a little bit.
Okay, as we're looking through our First John series, we're looking at chapter 2 this week, verses 1 through 11. And as we were talking, we were realizing Jesus, he ends up being two things, but they seem like polar opposites, but he's able to do that because Jesus is the key to everything. So, Nick, why don't you take the first one?
Yeah. So we have Jesus is the message and the messenger, and you're thinking, how can this be?
And you preached a sermon and had that in there a couple weeks ago.
Jesus is the message and the messenger. So he is the good. He's the good news. He is the message, but then he's also the main one that brings this message. And so Jesus is the message and the messenger.
The next one we're looking at is Jesus is the gift and the giver. He's the one who is giving the gift of himself. And normally you can't do that, but Jesus can do that because of his role of being the Savior for the whole world.
Yeah. So as we're starting to see here, we see these pieces fit into each one of these blanks, and there's so many different things that fit in here, things that you can think of, things that we can think of that fit in here. Jesus is blank and blank. So the next one is Jesus is the victim and the victor. And so we know in Jesus' last hours of life, he was arrested, he was tortured, he was crucified and killed. But then we know 3 days later, he arose the victor over death.
And so then we also have Jesus is human and divine. And on the face of it, how does that ever work? And there's more books written about that than I have hairs on my head, which may not mean a whole lot, but Jesus is both, because he's fully human. I mean, he actually died a real death and bled and tortured and suffered, but he was divine before, and he's divine now. He's still alive even now, 2,000 years later, and so that's the beauty of God coming down in human form. So he's both divine and human.
Yeah, and as we're sitting here, standing here talking, I just thought of another one for all those educators out there. Jesus is the teacher and the lesson. Yeah. Jesus is the teacher and the lesson. So let's go down to this next one. Jesus is the revealer and the revelation. So if you don't know what a revelation is, it's a moment when God reveals something about himself to humanity, right? The Bible is God's biggest revelation that we have, and Jesus is the biggest revelation that we have about God. We know the most about God because of Jesus. And so Jesus, he's the one that brings this revelation. He's revealing himself. He's revealing information about God, but then he is the revelation. He is what's being revealed. And so Jesus is the revealer and the revelation.
And then this last one comes out of our passage for today, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Jesus is the advocate and the atoning sacrifice. So let me explain that. These are words we don't normally use. He's an advocate, meaning he advocates for us. He's standing before the judge and he's saying, boy, I really think we need to forgive these humans. You know, we need to help them. So he's there doing that, realizing, yes, I am guilty, but Jesus is asking for that guilt to be absolved. And he's the atoning sacrifice, meaning he's actually going to take my punishment. I mean, somebody's got to pay for the sins that I have done, and Jesus is saying, I'll take those sins. So he's the person who's trying to make sure that we don't get punished, but then he's also the one taking the punishment for us. When you think about that and you think about Jesus, who's without sin, and he becomes sin by being on the cross. So again, that's another one of those. Wow, it's huge. So as we were looking at the passage for today, we thought this would be a good way to recognize Jesus is the key to everything, and some of these things definitely come out in the passage for today. So one of the things we were thinking, what ones do you think of when you think about Jesus is blank and blank? What might those be? And include those in the comment section as you watch the video here, and then you think, oh, well, Jesus is, whatever ones you come up with, the teacher in the lesson or whatever, and put that in the comments and share that, and we'll get a chance to talk with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for playing along. This has been Deep Thoughts with Nick and Carl. Next up, we've got local news with Kim.
In other news, a local secretary at a church is being forced to listen to corny religious humor by two pastors who think they're funny, but they're really not. You can contribute to this lovely secretary if you'd like by calling the number at the bottom of the screen, 1-800-HELP-KIM. Again, that's 1-800-HELP-KIM.